Now you're doing your research. You've got some results. What do you do with those results? How do you communicate your finding? How do you disseminate your work to other people? Because remember, research, particularly this ENLIGHT'EM project, is funded by taxpayers in EU. So there must be some benefit to the society. How will the society know about the work that you've done? How can people tap into the results and use it for the betterment of the society? So that is what this talk is all about. And these slides, as I mentioned, have been provided by Harold. So first of all, we start with this cartoon, which I think is quite interesting. He said, we have the ivory tower, which is the university, and you are right inside doing your work with no disturbance from anyone. Once you finish your research, what will be the impact of your work? So you can see whatever you've done here is falling on, this little person. This little person can be, the society, a company, or things like that. So what will be the impact on them? This is just a nice illustration of what the impact of your research will be like, okay? As we did previously, please feel free to stop me if you have some comments, and also let me know by raising your hand or typing asterisk in the chat box if you have a comment, a quick one, or if you want to wait till the end, that's also fine. So, okay, so we go on to the next slide. I'm struggling with this thing. It's not letting me. Sorry, okay, yeah. So in terms of dissemination and impact, Harold listed a number of dissemination and impact activities. So the first one here is called research. This refers to something like academic research. Some of you, the ESRs, will be working in universities and you produce research output. This number one covers pretty much that is research done in university environment. And the second one is some of you will be in industry. So you're doing research that is a lot more inspired by the industrial need, by your host need. And then all of that, does your project add something of commercial value? How will it impact on the society? And what about the general media? How do you want them to portray your research? How do you communicate your research to the general media? So we go through each one of these 5 bullet points, one at a time. So the first one is more or less like in academic research. How do you go about doing your research? So he said you have to be very brave. Non-incremental and transformational research. You see, all of these are nice words, but it's extremely difficult to achieve these things. Like you heard yesterday, choosing a research topic is not an easy thing. It's extremely difficult to have the vision, to go into something that will be transformational, because at the beginning, you don't know what is going to be transformational. You're trying to establish a new field. That again requires a lot of vision, which is not an easy thing to have. It's not a skill that you go to the classroom to learn. So you have to understand what the research direction is. You read literature to see what is going on, and then try to establish something completely new. Going through this, a question came through my mind, and that is that for most of the ESRs on this project, your kind of task has been defined to some extent. We have the research proposal. We've identified areas where we want you to work. So you might now ask the question, how can I establish a new field when what I'm meant to do has been somewhat defined from the outset? Yes, that might be true, but in terms of the technique, in terms of how do you solve that problem, you might find new areas or new avenue for solving the problem already identified in the proposal. So that is highly relevant there. And then once you've done your work, it's transformational, non-incremental, you've been very brave, you've been very bold, you've taken the high risk. Then you can publish your work in high impact journals or conferences. Now, if your work is closer to the computer science, there are certain conferences in computer science that are even rated more than journals. In electrical engineering or electronic engineering, journals are usually rated more than conferences, but some conferences are called flagship conferences for your society, in which they are highly and very well recommended. So you need to make sure you publish in those conferences and journals. An example of relevant journal might be something like IEEE Transactions, for instance. For conferences, it might be things like ACM conferences. Mobicom is a good example of an ACM conference. In electronic engineering and comms, you can look at things like, Globacom, Globecom as a conference, or you might look at things like ICC, International Communication Conference. Those are flagship conferences within the communication society. Again, there are going to be subject differences there. Starting, you need to talk to your supervisor. From your literature review, you see which conferences are the best ones in your field, and from your society, you find out. And your supervisor can also help you. One other thing you might consider is things like this open access repository. And archive is an example. It's just one. It's used mostly by physicists, and increasing number of other scientists are using it now. So it's just a repository. It's not peer-reviewed like the usual journal, but it helps you to put a mark in the ground that I've done this work and I put it out there. It's open access, it's not peer-reviewed. It's possible you put in archive and then submit to a journal or a conference for peer review. That is also possible, but it's a very good way of reaching a lot more audience by putting your research in archive or any open access repository. Whichever organization you work for, whichever university you are affiliated to, it's very likely that they have also their own repository for depositing paper. So please find out. Open access is now almost compulsory for major research funding councils, and particularly this ENLIGHT'EM, our output, they have to be open access. That is, they have to be accessible by everybody. So we have to comply with open access regulation. You don't have to worry too much about that. It's a discussion that you need to have with your supervisor. They will guide you on how to achieve all of that. And you need to be able to make your data also accessible. When you have any experimental data or research data, they also need to be accessible. They have to be open access as part of requirement for open access publication. Again, your university or ENLIGHT'EM project as a whole, we have the plan to deal with open access in terms of that. So that is academic research for you. If you have questions, please do let me know, as I mentioned earlier. Also, you present at conferences and workshops. These are avenues to communicate your work to people that are working in similar area. Okay, so that is what you go to conferences to do. When you get there and the conference and workshop, you get almost instantaneous feedback on your work. You see people comment on what you've done. They come to ask you questions. They interact with you. You interact with other people. That is very good. One key thing to take with you when you're going for conference or for posters or oral presentation is you have to practice and practice and practice. You have to rehearse your talk so many times. You rehearse with yourself, you rehearse with your friends, you rehearse within your research group, so that you make sure that you don't make simple mistakes. So that, again, when you rehearse a lot of times, it helps to build your confidence. So these things I cannot stress it enough, how important it is to practice and practice. And before you go to a conference to present, always share your work with your supervisor, first of all, to get immediate feedback, and your colleagues, so they can help you spot whatever they think is not going well in that. And try and simplify it in order to communicate with people. Other people in the audience, you need to know who your audience is. Some of the audience might not be from your field, so you try and make it as simple and accessible as possible. How do you measure the impact of your academic publications? A good one that was mentioned briefly yesterday is also featured here, and that is called the H index or H factor. So it was designed by a guy called H. So that's why it's called, H index, and the short form is H index. So essentially what H index means is number of publications that you have that have, H number of citations. So you have H publications with H citations. So if somebody has an H index of 10, it means they have at least 10 publications with no less than 10 citations. So that is the H index. It's a metric that people use to compare researchers. Beyond that, it doesn't really signify whether your work is more impactful than than any other work. You understand? So just know that it's not a golden standard. It's just another metric, that people use to compare researchers or outputs. So that is H index. Is that any question on H index from anyone before we continue?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yep.
So, does it mean that the H number of papers, each of them has H number of citations? Is that correct?
Yes. So for
So if,
instance,
for
if
example, yes, yes.
go on, go on.
I mean, if I have, for example, 10 publications that you said about, that means that each index will be 10.
I think I just lost you there.
Hello, can you hear
No,
me?
yep, yep.
Yeah. So what that means is, for example, if I have 10 publications, then each of those 10 publications has at least 10 citations. That's when the H index will be 10.
That's correct. That's correct. So
Okay.
if you have
Thank you.
10 publications, and out of your 10 publications, say 8 of them have about, say, 10 or more citations. Only 8 has, 8 or more citations. Only 8 has 8 or more. Then your H index is going to be 8.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments from anyone? And please, I don't want anybody to be too bogged down by these metrics. It does not mean, if you don't have a high H index, it doesn't mean your work is not impactful, because by nature of some research, it takes time for us to see the impact of them. You don't see the impact immediately. And as was mentioned yesterday, some review paper, because everybody wants to use them as introduction to their work, then they might have a lot of citations. It doesn't really mean they are contributing something new. It's just a review or a kind of a survey paper. So we just have to take it, with a pinch of salt. It's not the gold standard, not at all. Okay. So if you do your research within an industrial setting, then the focus might be slightly different. So you're trying to solve a real world problem. It might be a problem that your company wants you to solve so that they can sell products and make some profit from it. So the way you measure that is completely different. They're not measured the same way as you measure an academic research. So for instance, in an industrial work, you might be contributing to standard. The number of standard that you might contribute to. In PLC, for instance, we have 802, 802.11bb or 802.15.7. If you contribute to that, that is, impactful research. At times, when you work within industry, you are not even allowed to disseminate. You are not allowed to present in conferences. Why? Because there might be trade secret there. There might be something that the company wants to patent, they want to protect, so that they protect their own source of revenue. So you are not allowed to. It does not mean you are not doing, impactful research. Somebody doing in university might be going to 2, 1, 5, or 5 conferences, but you might not go to any. But you're both doing impactful research, but in a different setting. So in industry, typically you have white papers. White papers might be a kind of a marketing tool or sales tool to tell the will-be customers what ideas that they've got. You might have company reports as well. Valuable, but different to what you do in academic environment. So how do you measure the impact in that sense? Well, you might look at the number of products sold. You might look at the number of production line that your idea has gone into. You might look at what standard you've influenced and so on and so forth. Those are also valuable measure of the impact of research done within industrial setting. So whether you are within the industry or the university, your research might also have commercial value. Okay, and by design, by default, any research done in engineering and computer science, they have inherent commercial value, because typically science and engineering is applied work. So by default, there's a commercial value of what you do, be it your algorithm, or be it your test bed, or be it your prototype that you are trying to develop. It will be. Now, one way of protecting your idea is to consider a patent. Again, my suggestion is this shouldn't be something you do alone by yourself. You need to talk to your supervisor and the team that you work with. Therefore, you can decide how to go about your patent. One thing is, patent is expensive, so you don't want to go through all of that by yourself. So you need lawyers to do all of that. So you want to work with your supervisor. A university, typically we have a unit that will be dealing with that for you. Your company will, more often than likely, also have a unit that will be dealing with the issue of patents. So it's good to talk with them when it comes to patents. If you are inclined towards patents to protect your idea, it makes sense not to publish it first, because once you publish, it becomes common knowledge. Anybody can access it. Okay, so you need to check with your supervisor before you publish. When you have your project meeting, discuss it. That, oh, I've got this great idea. What do you think? Should we publish first, or should we be looking into patent? That is a nice discussion to have. The value of patent is high, okay, and it might be part of standard. And you get value from patent when it turns into things like a spin-out company, or when somebody wants to use the idea. That is when you get return on your patent. There are a lot of companies that their model is to develop a lot of patents, and they just sell their patent and make money from it. You know, that is well established, and that is fine. That is their own business model. How do you measure whether it's got a commercial value? Well, it can lead to scalable business. You know, you can have a portfolio of patents that you do. It is not so much valued in academic research. It is valued, but not as much. But in industry, it's a lot more valued. So that is all I've got to say on the issue of patent there. Are there questions? I can take one before we move on if there's any. Okay, so we go on to the next point, and that is the societal impact of your research. And this can be things like advocacy. In other words, can you change policy? Can you influence the decision of your government to do things differently? For instance, there is an issue about the number of female in science and engineering. If you do a piece of work that will encourage more female to be doing engineering, if you do a piece of work that influences government decision, that is highly valuable to the society. There's this pandemic is a great opportunity, you know, for people working in vaccine and so on and so forth to influence policy and make big impact on the society. You know, that's a very topical one. And also, you can give public enlightenment talk. An example is the TED Talk, you know, to enlighten people about science and about the work you do. It might be the case that you visit schools, you know, primary schools, secondary schools, high schools, to disseminate your work to them. You want to encourage people to take up science and engineering at very early age. That is part of societal impact, because if they do so, you know, that is good for the economy, because you have more science people in future. So that is a great way of disseminating your work. So your work can also have societal impact. Again, it's a great idea to have this discussion. It is often the case that your supervisor might get invited to some of these talks. So talk with them and say, I think that sounds interesting. Can I come along? Or can I be part of that? Okay. One example that we are planning to do in ENLIGHT'EM is this MOOC, this massive open online courses. It will be, you know, enlightening for anyone to do, and we want all ESL to also be part of that. You have to contribute to that MOOC, to that massive open online discussion about visible light communications. So that is talking about societal impact. What you can also do is talk to the media. And I want to believe some of us here might have social media accounts. Is that correct? Nowadays, we often use scientists using their social media account to publicize their work. So you've got a new paper that has just been published. Why not? You can put it on LinkedIn. You can say a few words about it on Twitter. Hey, we just got this fantastic result about VLC. Check it out. You put the paper there. You might have a YouTube channel that you use to present your work. You know, if your work attracts the press, you know, the print media or the broadcast, then you talk about your work. You can present at trade shows if you have something like a prototype. An example is the Mobile World Congress or the Consumer Electronics Show in US, or, you know, press releases. Again, these are the things that you have to do in conjunction with your supervisor. These are highly valuable things to gain, you know, to gain a lot more impact and to disseminate your work. A slight caution, though, is when you want to do things like social media, you really have to be careful, because at times it might consume more time that you intended to. So that's just, that would be my caution there. Just make sure you measure the amount of time you spend on social media publicizing your work. So a figure of merit in this case might be how many people are aware of a particular research. Do people know what you're working on? How would they know? Well, these are some of the examples of how people might get to know about the work that you do. Has anybody read any VLC article or something about VLC in media apart from academic journal and conference papers? Can anybody share their own experience with us that you've seen, something about VLC or Li-Fi in, general media or newspaper or TV or something like that? Anyone?
Yes, this is Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yesterday I watched a video of Professor Harold Haas talking about the Li-Fi technology on TED Talk yesterday. It was very insightful. Yeah.
Exactly. And did you find that accessible, even though you are a researcher in the field now? Was it accessible to you in terms of the dissemination method? Daniel. Hello. Yes, I think we can take another comment. Anyone else want to share their experience of, previous research they've seen in popular media? Anyone else? Maybe I turn it around. How many of us have social media accounts, be it LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever? Everybody?
Yeah, well, I do.
Okay, and do you intend to use that for your research?
Well, I think it can be a good tool to to make your work acknowledged. Of course, there is it has to be acknowledged by your supervisor and your company, and so. But yeah, I think it can be a good tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Does anybody have an opinion why they would not use their social media to publicize their work? Why you think you wouldn't want to do it? Does anybody have an opinion on why they wouldn't consider it? Yes? A volunteer? I can't hear anybody saying anything.
Yeah, they would like addressing using.
Sorry, I think maybe this comes from the fact that sometimes of the separation of professional opinions and of disseminating professional opinions and personal opinions. And for example, if we use the platform like a social media, we tend to think about it as a personal opinion platform than our research. For example, then I would say LinkedIn is more than a platform that one can use, and I think is more for me. I would say more. I would say less difficult to use in that sense that it's like that everybody knows in that platform that it's a professional, but in a sense it's a bit challenging to come out to very general public where there can be many different levels and scopes that to look at what your posts are and go specifically to the scientific sector or your research sector. So I think it's a challenge in a psychological way.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for that. The one I really want to emphasize is that, yes, I understand your apprehension about social media, is that you probably should consider having your own personal website. Now, a pathway to doing that might be to talk to your supervisor, ask if they have the group's website, that is a website for the research group, and then you are listed there. So on that group research website, then you can list what you are doing. You can put your own papers there. You can put your ideas there. You can use that to attract traffic to what you do. And when people search on the internet, then it can direct people to your personal website. You can also use that as an avenue to disseminate your work. So if you don't have a personal website, please, I would strongly suggest you talk to your supervisor and make sure you are listed on the group's research website. Also, ENLIGHT'EM has a very, very good website. And thanks to Borja and Domenico that are populating that website with relevant information. So that is also another avenue that we use to disseminate research done in Project ENLIGHT'EM. So in terms of the final comment.
So, Popoola, sorry for interrupting. I think that Usman Raza mentioned a comment in the chat that maybe it's worth it to comment. He said that some companies might not allow to promote some events in online platforms. Maybe Usman can give his view about this.
Yes, please.
The companies, the enterprise view.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't see the chat box. So Usman, do you want to make your point?
Hello, Usman. Okay, he was referring to posting the stuff on personal websites, so maybe he's not. He hasn't got a microphone.
Maybe if I can contribute to this, this is sometimes also in the contracts we sign with the companies that we have to be, especially if it can clash with a trade secret or something related with the inner workings of the company or its marketing plans or its product placement and the goals. Then it's there's a specific point that we cannot really allow ourselves to spread the confidential information.
Yeah, absolutely. So whatever we say here, you have to comply with the rules of the organization that you work for, be it a university or a company. That goes without saying. That is critical. You know, you can't do something that is antithetical to what your company believes in. You just can't. You know. So thank you so much for those points. Very vital points. And the final comment here is the starting point is that you have this big idea, you want to change the world. You have this transformational research that you want to do. That is a great starting point, but it is not a necessary condition to get a PhD or to make headway in science. It is required, it is a necessary requirement, but it is not sufficient. That's not all that you need. You need a lot more about dissemination, impact, and so on and so forth. Okay, your work is only transformational if people recognize it as such. People need to see the impact of it, you know, for it to be transformational. And there's one thing that we all, at least in my experience, suffer from. People at times want immediate glory. My recommendation is, please don't seek immediate glory. Okay, you might see an accomplished researcher and get their names mentioned all of the time. You see somebody's citation index so high, and you're like, wow, am I ever going to get there? It does take time. Your emphasis should be on doing great work, and then all of that will follow. You disseminate your work very well, you do great science, the rest will just follow. That will be my advice. In terms of dissemination, consider all channels that are allowed within your organization. We just heard about certain trade secret that your company might not allow certain channel, but discuss with your supervisor on which channels are the best to publicize your work. Attend training courses. Most universities have training on dissemination. Most companies also, I believe, we have some form of training on how to communicate your research. Please take advantage of those training facilities. And when it comes to talking, going to conferences or workshops, you have to practice. You cannot practice enough. Practice and practice. There is this famous saying by the late physicist Richard Feynman that says, if it is well understood, then we should be able to teach it to freshmen, that is people that are just coming to the university. So if you understand it very well, you should be able to teach it to basically anybody. Okay, so please invest in understanding what you've done before you go out to disseminate it. And with that, I'll come to the end of that presentation.